The gift of encouragement is a real spiritual blessing. I know this firsthand because there have been people in my life who exemplify this quality of the grace of God. The list of such people is long. If I started naming them, there would be those from my childhood and my young adulthood, of course, that you here in Franklin would never have heard of. You wouldn't know who they are, so those names wouldn't affect you very much. I could talk about some of the professors I had in college. Two in particular, Andy Smith and Dr. Mayers, were extremely formative in my life and encouraging me academically towards ministry. And then, of course, there would be people from this congregation who encouraged me, some of whom, unfortunately, are no longer with us. Arlene Harrington was a significant supporter and very encouraging to me. On numerous occasions, she told me if the congregation was giving me trouble to let her know, and she would straighten it out. I don't know. I never had to go there. I'm not sure how that would have worked, but I appreciated that. And of course, Bill and Marilyn Moffett that we lost last year, time and time again. It felt like grandparents to me. And then one more whom I saw on Friday at 103 years old, and that's, of course, Joe Beach. Joe had so many useful words, so many kind, encouraging words. I could keep going, but I'd leave somebody off, and I don't want to hurt someone's feelings because you would say, you didn't say I was encouraging, and that's not the point that I'm trying to make at all. Two people, though, in the larger Christian community stand out as great examples of what I'm trying to talk about this morning. One of whom you may not know as well, although some of you will have met him, and that is our ABCOPAD regional co-executive minister. That's quite a bit. His name is Mark Masurgian Smith. And I have worked with him a number of times in the last 11 years. I've met with him in person. I've been on the phone with him. I've had texts and emails. And I always walk away from spending time with Mark feeling bolstered and uplifted, feeling like I should have more energy and like things are possible, because he just has that. And it just bubbles out of him in time and time again. Now, the second person is someone you know from this town, and someone most of you probably have had similar experiences with, and that is Lou Slaughterbeck. If you know the quality I'm looking for, this is the guy I'm talking about. And since he's not in this church this morning, he's worshiping down at Christ Church, I'm not embarrassing him as much, although he may hear about this and then be embarrassed. That's not my point either. But that name is on this list, and it should be no surprise to you. Those of you who were here for Lois Ann's funeral, Lou eulogized her and did an amazing job and talked to the children directly because he had been their teacher. It was great. But if you remember that, he went out of his way at the beginning of that to look over to me sitting here, the guy who's doing the funeral, and say, "I love you, brother." And that's just amazing, because who would think to do that? How many people are willing to say that publicly about someone else? But that's simply what private conversations between myself and Lou over the last 11 years have been like so many times. We all know that no conversation with Lou is going to be short. But you really wouldn't want it to be anyway, right? Because you're just soaking it up. So there are many reasons why belonging to a congregation is both necessary and beneficial to our discipleship. And encouragement is one of the most important one of those. In large part because we receive so little of it in this life, outside from our family and friends. And frankly, some people's family and friends are not all that encouraging anyway. But if a church body is healthy, it will overflow with encouragement. Let's take a look at our text this morning and see where that idea is coming from. Romans chapter 1, like I said last week, we've got a marathon of working our way through Romans in front of us. This is the next thought of Romans here, 8 to 15. Starts this way. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. So before he dives into theology, Paul takes a moment to discuss his connection to the church at Rome. As you recall, this is not a church that Paul founded, and he has yet to visit them. Even though Paul did not personally know this church, its reputation preceded it. Now, to say that about someone or something can go both ways, right? Your reputation precedes you isn't always a compliment. In this case, the report that Paul has heard, and it sounds like multiple people have told Paul this over the years, has been positive. Given all the travel to and from the city of Rome, this church, and soon in Rome there will be multiple churches, is always going to be among the most well-known in the early church. And so their reputation will be known far and wide because of all the people coming to Rome and going from Rome, especially after the fall of Jerusalem, which is in the near future. Once the Judean Christians are scattered, the Roman church will gain prominence among some other ones like Alexandria. And so Paul says, your reputation is encouraging. Second, verse 9, God, whom I serve in my spirit in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness how constantly I remember you in my prayers at all times. Paul is rightly famous for his preaching and teaching, isn't he? When we think about the Apostle Paul, we think about the depth of Romans and the wisdom of his writing and all of the people that he personally had a hand in their conversion and the founding of all those churches. But we should not overlook how often he writes about his time in prayer on behalf of individuals and churches. Most of Paul's letters mention his prayer on behalf of the people receiving the letter. Taken together, all of those references, and I looked them all up, emerge. First off, if you look at all of them like this one, you see that Paul's prayers were frequent. They were constant. They were a thing that kept happening. They were also, and this is of course related, continuous and ongoing. So he not only prayed often for them, he continued to pray often for them. We don't know what that looked like, what is often in Paul's mind. But it was something that he was conscious of continuing to do on a somewhat frequent basis. Third thing that is in common, they were focused on thanksgiving to God for his work in and through the people that Paul was praying for. He had a very positive attitude about that prayer. What can I lift up in prayer about that church or about that person because of what God is doing for them? And then fourthly, Paul wasn't alone in this effort. I don't want to make him sound to be a superhero doing this all by himself. In several of those passages, it is not I and my, it is we and our. We have remembered you in our prayers. In those cases, Paul talking about his team or the church that he was currently staying with. It's clear from both the book of Acts and from his own writings that Paul was a tremendous man of faith. Nobody would doubt that. His commitment was unshakable. His resolve was firm. Perhaps one of the reasons why is that he spent so much time and energy in communication with God on behalf of others. Regular, ongoing, grateful prayer is transformative, especially for the people doing the praying. And so Paul continues and says, and I pray that now at last by God's will, the way may be open for me to come to you. In addition to his prayers on their behalf, which Paul's been offering up for some time, a recent focus of his prayers has been his desire to travel west after his Jerusalem visit. He's on his way when he writes Romans to Jerusalem to deliver the famine relief that he has collected from the churches of Asia Minor and Greece. Because in Judea there is a difficult famine happening, and the Christians there are in danger of starving. And so Paul wants to take them money so that they can buy grain and they can survive. But when he gets done with that, he says, then I want to come west. I am coming to see you. The next is first verse 11 and 12, and this is going to be the heart of our message this morning. I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. Why did Paul want to visit this church in person? Well, one thing COVID-19 has taught us is that remote is always a trade-off, right? Kids in school, going at work. I know some people have been remote for some time for work and they've been loving it. I'm looking at you, Kathy, because there's no commute and all of that. But there's a trade-off for most of us if we're doing things remote. When Nicole became pregnant, we got an iPhone. I had a flip, one of those pay-as-you-go phones before because I didn't care. It wasn't on it. But I said, my wife is pregnant. If I don't get an iPhone so I have FaceTime, I've got 2 grandmas that are going to be upset with me. They're going to want to FaceTime and see this baby regularly. And that has been amazing and very beneficial. But it's not the same. It's not the same as Clara getting a hug from Grandma. She knows that and I know that. But sometimes we don't have choices. And so we make do with remote. Paul wrote this letter. He couldn't be there now. He was hoping to be there in the future, but he said, I'll write a letter. That's the best I can do for now. Genuine human contact and interaction has built-in superiority. We know this. In Paul's specific case, he felt that he could help the church at Rome with a spiritual gift. He doesn't go into details about what that gift might be, what particular thing that he thinks he can impart to them. He does, however, go on in the next sentence, or at least the next phrase, to comment on the larger category of Christian fellowship, to talk about where that gift fits in. It's part of this larger idea of Christian fellowship. This encouragement derived from experiencing the faith of others mutually with your own. In other words, spending time together would allow Paul to demonstrate his faith. He would somehow utilize the fruit of the Spirit to benefit them. And this is important, their demonstration of their faith, utilizing the same fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control, all of those things that are in us because of faith, they would benefit Paul in return. Why? How does that work? Well, the answer is found when we consider the nature of God and the nature of humanity. God is triune. That's just a fancy way of saying 3 in 1. Eternally existing as one substance or being in 3 persons. Thus, fellowship within the Godhead. Father with Son, Son with Spirit, Spirit with Father, right? All the different combinations thereof existed before creation. This is a key element of Christian theology. We need to understand this. Before there was a universe, before there was time, God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were fellowshipping together. A fellowship that we know included mutual love. When God created humanity, this need for connectedness, this need for relationship was built in. It's hardwired in our DNA between us and our God and between each other. We are social creatures by design. So when we, as finite beings who are living by faith, trusting promises from God about what awaits us on the other side of the veil of death, when we spend time with and build relationship with other people who, like us, are living by that same faith, it enhances our faith. leading to things like peace and joy and, of course, encouragement, as we see with our own eyes that we are not alone on this journey, that God's will is for a vast people to journey together from darkness to light, helping and supporting each other along the way. God has not saved persons, He has saved a people. And that plural understanding is so important to understanding what church is all about. These connections are facilitated by our mutual experience of the Holy Spirit. All those who are in Christ share one and the same Spirit. Therefore, we all face the same challenges as we strive to overcome sin, and we all do so by the same power. We have so much in common. To see that others struggle as you do holds you off from despair. You do not say to yourself, I'm the only one who struggles with this. Because you know other Christians, you spend time with them, and you realize some of them have the same issues. And seeing other people succeed gives you hope. I can do it too. They did it, so can I. But what of the misanthropes, the curmudgeons, and the loners? What about those who don't want to be with other people, even fellow believers? To be an introvert or to be shy is one thing. To enjoy solitude and the quiet is similar. But to actually forsake fellowship of fellow believers is a sign of unhealthy faith, or maybe even no faith at all. The reason why is because we must demonstrate our love for each other in order to prove that our faith is genuine. James says this, John says this, it's throughout the New Testament. We need opportunities to show our faith in order for our fledgling faith to grow into maturity. Serving others is how we lay aside our selfishness. It's how we embrace Christ-like love. And to do that, we need to be together. A Christian by himself can only care for himself. How do you learn to be like Christ that way? Doesn't make any sense. Well, what of those who dislike, and this is a fascinating term, organized religion? That's an interesting word to put in front of religion. Those of us who work for the church often wonder just how organized this thing really is. Disorganized religion is what you get half the time. But say you are one of those people who says, I don't like organized religion. Or you say, I'm spiritual but not religious. That's another familiar phrase that we keep hearing. Well, first off, let me say that organized religion has done plenty of things through the centuries to tarnish its reputation. I get that. I'm the last person who's going to try to whitewash that sad truth. When I teach church history, we talk about some of the worst parts, about the 30 Years' War, about the Holocaust. We talk about that. However, the requirement that we love one another is a command from God. It cannot be set aside by human failings, and it cannot be subverted by an attempt to be a Christian apart from the church. Let me be clear in this. There is no other vessel of the will of God in this present age than the church that Jesus founded. The apostles built on that, and we inherited it. Aside from losing the crucial opportunity to help others, one of the other primary red flags that makes solo Christianity impossible takes us back to Paul's hoped-for mutual encouragement. Without fellowship, without mutual experience of faith, our relationship with God becomes brittle, apt to anxiety and despair. And how do I know that? I know that from one of the most important, or one of the most useful examples of the Scriptures, and that is the greatest of all prophets, a man named Elijah. Understand this in 1 Kings in the story of Elijah. In one moment you see Elijah calling down fire from heaven, for crying out loud. He's got all the prophets of Baal, and he has challenged them to a showdown. Whoever can call down fire from heaven, that's the God that we will worship. And that scene unfolds, and it is powerful. And they go first, and they are dancing and cutting themselves, and Elijah's laughing at them because they're not getting it done. And then he says, pour water on my wood. I don't want anyone thinking I accidentally threw a match when no one was looking. And the fire comes down and burns that up. And you're thinking, man, Elijah, you are awesome. Wouldn't I want to have faith like that, right? But keep reading. Just after that triumph, we see Elijah fleeing from Ahab and Jezebel into the wilderness alone, where he says, I have had enough, Lord, take my life. 1 Kings 19:4. After showing Elijah his presence, that gentle whisper after the fire and the earthquake and the wind, the Lord told Elijah that he was not alone, that 7,000 of his fellow Israelites had remained loyal to the Lord his God. If a miracle-working prophet of God like Elijah can despair because he is disconnected from mutual encouragement of fellowship with other people of faith, will we fare any better? Do we think we're stronger than Elijah? Do we think we got a better connection to God than Elijah? That we don't need other people? It is arrogant to think that we do not need each other to be the disciples of Jesus that God has called us to be. Paul goes on, he says, I don't want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I've had among the other Gentiles. So having explained to the church at Rome that he anticipates great value to both them and him when he does visit, Paul next explains why he hasn't been there sooner. We don't know what prevented Paul from planning to travel to Rome sooner. Was it the responsibilities of his other churches? Every time he wanted to leave, somebody at Corinth or Ephesus or whatever was in trouble and he had to go put out a fire and had to go do this. It could have been that. I mean, my goodness, the man had a lot of responsibilities. Maybe his health was not good enough to travel. Maybe he had financial limitations and couldn't finance the trip. Or maybe spiritually he just sensed that the time was not yet right. Whatever the cause of the delay, Paul looked forward to seeing the Spirit working among them so that he could realize a harvest, once more talking about that farming analogy. And then he ends with this, I am obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. That is why I'm so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. The non-Greeks here in the Greek text is the word that we get barbarian from. At this point in his ministry career, Paul is thinking of people even beyond the borders of the empire, of people that are not a part of that Greco-Roman culture that his work has thrived in. He views his work for the Lord as an obligation, also a privilege and a blessing, no doubt, for Paul to be a part of this, but not a task that is optional for him. And so at the outset of this letter, Paul's intention of an in-person visit soon is made clear to his readers. That it ultimately will not come to pass because of arrest and imprisonment does not diminish at all how important it was to Paul that he and the church at Rome would be able to benefit each other by experiencing their mutual faith. 3 thoughts I want you to take away from this text as we close. Number 1, regular, ongoing, and grateful prayer is transformative. The Apostle Paul did it. It was amazing for him. We should learn from that. Secondly, Mutual encouragement from each other's faith is foundational to healthy Christian discipleship. We need this. And then thirdly, the big picture. God created us as social beings. The church is God's chosen vehicle to fulfill our need to fellowship with, serve, and support fellow Christians, and to be served and supported in turn. At this point, we will prepare our hearts and minds for the Lord's table.